Hello, I'm Cliff Powell, better known as Cliff Davis to the radio and television public, if you will. And I am the son of Steve Powell, who played Foreman Scotty on WKY television, Channel 4 as we all know it now. And it's my proud privilege and honor to be sitting here speaking with you and to be a part of all of the broadcast greats that have come on and told their story. We had a lot of great people in the market and a lot of great people that were at Channel 4, and they did wonderful things and wonderful memories. There's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't get reminded of Dad and how special he was and all of the great things that he did and how well liked he was. So that tells me that he must have done some pretty special stuff. Dad was from Western Oklahoma, born in Sharon, kicked around in Vici and Woodward, Oklahoma. About 1930, moved here with his family, went to school, had a little bit of schooling at OCU, and decided that one day he was going to get into television. How he got into television, how he got into radio, was he was working for a department store, and he had basically been let go. So he's walking out of the department store and a car drives by and he hears a radio. And he thinks to himself, that's what I'll do. I'm going to get into radio. And the rest is kind of history. So he was a page at a couple of the local stations and worked his way up. Went off and fought in the Korean War. A lot of people don't know this, but not only was he a local hero, but he was also a national hero. He was a recipient of the Bronze Star and fought frontline in Korea for 2.5, 3 years. When he came back to Oklahoma City, he got a job in Tulsa and was working in radio. And back then, radio was prevalent, but television was still this toy. They hadn't really figured out what it was and if it would work and how it would work. So a memo came out that everybody needed to be down at Studio A and try out for a kids show that would be airing. And the story that I got was the first week that the memo came out, nobody showed up, so nobody was interested. And so the second week rolled around, and basically there was a mandatory audition, and you needed to have something put together. And we wanted something that had a kids' television show feel to it. And so Dad went home and he wrote what became the Foreman Scotty Show. Foreman of a ranch, and then Scotty, a little Scotty dog. He thought everybody would accept that name. Got into it and said he completely fell in love with it after about an hour or two of doing the show for 2 or 3 days, and was there in Tulsa for 3 years. Started the show in 1953, I believe, and then WKY-TV called and asked him to bring the show in 1956 to the Oklahoma City market, in which he did. But funny stuff coming up as Foreman Scotty's son, and I still get it today, but I'm always faced with telling stories, and boy, we had some really good ones. I thought it was normal when you were a young child growing up to get hung up at the grocery store for hours, and your parent would be signing autographs. And I started to figure it out very slowly that other parents didn't do that. And as I grew up, I realized that this guy, he was obviously pretty special. And it was neat and still is neat. I still get it today. Your dad was Foreman Scotty, tell me about it. Or let me tell you about my experience on the show. Or he wiggled my ponytail. Or I got to ride on Woody. Funny thing about Woody, I think there were 3 Woodies. Our friends out at the Oklahoma Historical Society have one. There's one in my living room, which we'll talk about later on another episode. And I don't know where the 3rd one is, but Woody was the birthday horse that all the kids came on, and if you had your birthday, you got to sit on the birthday horse. So that was special. When the Magic Lasso would come out, Dad would give away a golden horseshoe every show, and he'd tell all the kids in the audience to make the funniest crazy faces they could. And this superimposed Magic Lasso would come around the screen, and if it landed on you, you won the golden horseshoe. And that was a big deal. If you won the golden horseshoe being on the Foreman Scotty show, you were the talk of the town. And so one cue for one of the producers, he would say the guy's name backward. And Nixo Billy was the key word, but it's really was the producer's name backwards, which was Billy Nix. So it was one of his, how he cued some of the people that were helping out with the show, producing the show. But this guy was just really an incredible talent and a wonderful person to grow up with. And I tell you, there's not a day that doesn't go by. Again, I don't miss him. I know a lot of other people that miss him, and he did some really special stuff. When you touch the hearts of children, like he did, and a lot of the other people at Channel 4 did, it's a special thing, and he did. And that's neat to sit here and talk about it. But he was a super great guy, and you know, the stories go on and on about, you know, Foreman Scotty and the adventures of Foreman Scotty and how they put the show together and how they did things. You have to understand that there wasn't a textbook back then on how to do television. A lot of these guys were coming over from radio, and they would take some of the radio format and then they would adopt it to television. And we still have that today. Breaks and pre-sells and back sells and so on and so forth. But putting the show together and making it all click, these guys were working with stuff that had never been done before. And it's real interesting to hear all of the stories, not just Foreman Scotty. It took a lot of people to get the Foreman Scotty show to air. Much like you see television today, there's a lot going on behind the camera. And so he'd tell funny stories. Back then, they would do commercials live, and he was doing a live spot for, I think, a Frigidaire freezer. And it was this new model that could open up from the left or the right, so you didn't have to worry about where it went in the kitchen. And so they have the refrigerator sitting there, and the camera opens up, and Dad's giving his spiel about how great it is. He says, you can see it opens up from the left and it opens up from the right. And it's this, you know, frost-free unit. It's brand new. It's the greatest thing in the whole world. And he looks back into the camera to get out of the spot, and he hears this crash. And he said it felt like the station was falling apart. And he looked up at the boom operator. He's gone. He looked over at the producer, and he's down below the deck laughing. And the cameramen are all kind of chuckling, and the cameras are moving up and going up and down a little bit. So he looks back, and the door of this refrigerator had fallen off onto the studio floor and was just sitting there rattling. And I said, well, what did you do then? He goes, well, I looked back into the guts of the camera, and he said, and they're easy to defrost, and walked off. Just really incredible stuff that they did out there. A couple funny stories. Dad had a plane and had the Circle 4 ranch logo on the tail. And he decided that he was going to fly it out and land it at Channel 4 and have the art department do the artwork. You know, I'm assuming so he could probably push that cost through the show. And so they did all the logo work and got the tail dressed up, Foreman Scotty on the plane, and had the Circle 4 ranch logo on the back. Gets in the plane, he takes off, and the GM at the time comes out and he's like, what are you all doing? And I'm like, well, that was Foreman Scotty, and we did some artwork on the plane, and you know, he's taken off. And the way the landscape was out at the station, he kind of went down and then went back up. And all they could see was the plane going down, and they all were waiting for it to get air and actually take off, and they all thought that, you know, maybe he had crashed or whatever, and he finally gets air and you know, takes off and flies away. But he told me he got into a lot of trouble on that one. But they did crazy stunts like that back then, and they made stuff like that happen and work, and flying between the guy wires of the, you know, the antennas out there and so on and so forth. But Dad did a lot of great things like the Zoo Key, which I think is still out at the zoo. A lot of people don't know that he opened up Stars and Stripes Park with Bob Hope. That was a pretty big deal. And other groundbreaking things. He was always at an opening of some event or some store. He helped bring TG&Y stores, which I don't think are any no longer in the market, helped them open up and was instrumental in helping them promote TG&Y. He was the first person to promote the icy. Nobody knew what an icy drink was. And can you imagine that now, not knowing what a Slurpee or an icy drink is? And maybe our friend John Spence over here might have some pictures. There's a good picture of him in his cowboy suit outfit next to an icy machine, one of the first ones. And you see these pictures and you just think, wow, you know, all of these people were on the forefront of really what we call now today advertising and marketing and branding. And they did it, they made it work. And you know, it really is, it's a neat thing to go back and look at all of the archives, look at all the really neat things that these guys had their hands on and that they helped create and do. And like I said, there was no textbook. Everything was just kind of made up as they went along, and they did a really good job. They made it work. Being Foreman, Scotty, and working in television, you always had some product around. And I can remember Coca-Cola pants, and I can remember Pez, when Pez was first starting, the little candy dispensers. We always had something at the house that Dad was promoting on the show, and there was always a little extra. A neat story is Dad used to have the show out at the fairgrounds, and here's how creative the guy was. He basically dreamed up a magic passageway from the studio out to the state fair. And so when he would go on live and during the state fair, he would promote that he was going to be at the state fair, and they'd go through this secret, you know, time capsule, and that's how he got out to the state fair. And he'd do the show out there live. And you know, when you're a kid and you're a child, you kind of believe that stuff. But it was wholesome, good family television. I can't, you know, I can't think what he would have to say about the Jerry Springer television type format these days. I don't think he would call that real television. This stuff that they did was wholesome, it was good, it was white hat, and all the kids just absolutely loved him. And that's really something special. Another story on the Golden Horseshoe. A lot of people ask me, well, how did he come up with the Golden Horseshoe? The story's simple. Basically, there was a mine, they found a bunch of gold, and they needed a way to sneak the gold out of the mine. And so they made golden horseshoes and put them on the hooves of the horses. And they snuck the gold out of the mine, and that's how he got the Golden Horseshoe, you know, hence the Golden Horseshoe. So that's a neat story there. But the creativity with these guys, it was just constantly, there was something coming off the top of their heads, because the creative was just, it was there, it was in place, and you know, no scripts to run off of. And so all of them really did a good job of creating and making the show work. I get questions about why was the show taken off the air and what happened. The show really wasn't taken off the air. Dad took the show off the air because the FCC passed rules saying that no one person during the kids' time block could say that one product was better than another. You couldn't be biased. Well, all of your money came from advertisers, and so he knew that it was just a matter of time. If they couldn't advertise on the show, you didn't have a budget. And so that's when cartoons really started to flourish and come into play. But you couldn't be a human. You could have a cartoon character say that a product's better, but you couldn't have a human say a product's better. And so they ended the show August 1971, and Dad went on to still stay in advertising and be creative and help market, and had clients, and just still, I mean, what a guy. I wish everybody, if you never met Steve Powell, if you never met Foreman Scotty, I wish you could have, because he was just one heck of a guy. Like I said, there's not a day that doesn't go by that I don't miss him, and I know a lot of other people miss him as well.